with your most essential doctrinal radicals. Don't isolate them out, hammer with them, or stick them in people's mouths like, sticks of clover. Put the clover in the teacup. Put the sugar in the teacup. Serve up tea. Serve up the whole picture of life. Let people hear life coming from you. And if you love the supremacy of God and it's flavoring everything you do. I was talking with some of the brothers about this just last night or this morning, saying, how do you get a church so that the tide will rise, so that a milieu can be created in a church where people can embrace an explicit statement about election or predestination or irresistible grace or the perseverance of the saints, things that Newton said, all my peace is here. And yet if you give it pervasive, unattached to life, it gags people. How do you do that? And then the answer is, you create in a church over 5, 10, 15 years an elevated view of the supremacy of God in all things. Is that banner up there? We exist to spread a passion for the supremacy of God in all things for the joy of all peoples. Now, most people like that, Arminian or Calvinist. But if you do that long enough and pervasive enough, what you're doing is creating a milieu in which doctrinal distinctives of Calvinism become more readily recognizable as precious and biblical. If you start without lifting the tide of God-centeredness, the exaltation of Christ, the saturation of Scripture, real life, enjoyment of a supreme and great and holy and wonderful God, then one fellow, I don't think he's here, sent me a tape years and years ago from another conference that I was at. Said, would you tell me what you think of this? This is my effort to help my people get on board with Reformed theology. And I listened to it and I just died. Listen to this thing. I just thought, man, get your head together. Because the first half of the sermon was just the history of the controversy. Who cares, right? His people don't give a rip about the history of the controversy. Their marriages are falling apart. Their kids don't come home anymore. They're just, well, who cares about the 16th century, for goodness sakes? And then he went into something else. And at the end, I think he mentioned a Bible verse. So this is just not the way to do it. And here, I'm very aware as I'm talking right now, because of one of you brothers telling me about the situation you've just been through, that John Piper is viewed, because of something I wrote on this, as being one of the most devious people in evangelicalism today, because I teach pastors how to sneak Calvinism into churches. I went to the website where it lists those 13 suggestions of how to get people on board with Calvinism. I read, oh, this is awful. I've got to fix this. And I read it and I thought, there's nothing devious about this at all. It's on the web page. And it says right up front what I think about everything. And you say to your people, this is what we want to do here. We want to move in a certain direction. There's nothing to hide anywhere. I hope that's not too widespread. Did he get it right? Did he get it right? Well, not everybody thinks so. The balance of how you handle controversy. Here's William Plummer's criticism. The pious and amiable John Newton made it a rule never to attack error or warn his people against it. He said, the best method of defeating heresy is by establishing truth. One proposes to fill a bushel with tares. Now, if I can fill it with wheat first, I shall defeat his attempts. Close quote. Still quoting Plummer now. Surely the truth ought to be abundantly set forth, but this is not sufficient. The human mind is not like a bushel. It may learn much truth and yet go after folly. The effect of Mr. Newton's practice was unhappy. He was hardly dead till many of his people went far astray. Paul says, preach the word, be instant, in season, out of season, reprove, rebuke, exhort with all long-suffering and doctrine. The more subtle, bitter, and numerous the foes of the truth are, the more fearless and decided should its friends be. The life of truth is more important than the life of any man or theories, end quote from Plummer. Plummer didn't think Newton got it right. Bruce Hindmarsh, who wrote this the first biography I held up, he also thinks there were weakness in the evangelical revival and awakening, of which Newton was a very central and key part. And this was his quote. While it is no disgrace that Newton was more a pastor than a theologian, it is one of the most serious indictments of the English evangelical revival that it produced so few theologians of stature. In other words, if our zeal for peace, conciliation, heartfelt affection for God and for people creates a milieu in which rigorous critical thinking and theology will not flourish, we may hurt the cause of Christ in generations to come while seeming to make the cause go better now. Oh, I wish I knew better how to avoid that. But you need to at least pose that question. In your denomination, in your church, in your little cluster of pastoral friends, is the music, is the demeanor of the pastor, is the ethos of the people shaping itself in such a way as to be inhospitable to rigorous, critical, intellectual theology? If so, it is possible and perhaps probable that the milieu is going to hurt the church in 50 years. Very few people are asking that question today. It has something to do with our worship services and the tone of them. It has something to do with the very spirit and demeanor of the pastoral life. It has something to do with the rah-rah slapstick of so much evangelicalism. It has a lot to do with the charismatic dimension of things. You see, if your mind doesn't work in such a way that you believe critical, careful, rigorous, intellectual theology that undertakes to pull all of the Bible together, solve the problems in it, interact with the big cultural movements outside, and write significant works that can make an impact on the culture and be there for the young people coming up through the colleges and the seminaries. If you don't believe that important, you won't even care about this question. You just want a person saved next Sunday or to have a good feeling after the worship service. It's bigger. It's bigger. You need to ask longer questions about what's coming of our churches and the whole atmosphere of evangelicalism in our day. Well, is he guilty as charged? I don't think so. I don't think so. Yes, John Wesley wrote him, "You appear to be designed by divine providence for a healer of breaches, a reconciler of honest but prejudiced men, and a uniter, happy work of the children of God." But in 1762, they broke. Not over predestination, but over perfectionism and the Pelagian things Newton saw in it. He had a backbone. It's true that Richard Cecil criticizes his own hero who writes the memoir, quote, that he did not always administer consolation with sufficient discernment. His talent, Cecil said, did not lie in discerning of spirits. He gives an example. He said, Newton once